it's cold out here. I'll call Mom first. You can try, but I suspect her phone will be off. I went back into the house, to the living room, and sat on the couch. I heard Sandy talking on the phone, clearly leaving a voicemail for Mom to call her urgently. Then she plopped into one of the soft chairs. It seemed to swallow her tiny frame. I waited for her to gather her thoughts and start the conversation. From the look on her face, I guess she didn't know where to begin. Finally, why won't you come to my wedding? You see, you already have the clues. No. From the look of confusion on her face, I could see that the extreme selfishness common to many brides had completely blinded my stepdaughter. This saddened me. I hadn't thought she was capable of such self-centeredness. I mentally shook myself. I was in a hurry to move on, I didn't have time for this. So I took charge of the conversation. Sandy, I've loved you since I first met you when you were a chubby 2-year-old with perpetually dirty fingers. I still love you, and depending on how things go, I may very well love you forever. I paused to determine the best way to continue, then decided to follow the format I used in the letter in my pocket, informing Sandy and her mother that I was leaving them. When I met your mom, she had just been abandoned by your biological father. We've told you this story often enough. He was a drunk, and after your mom caught him with another woman for the second time, she threatened to leave him if he didn't change. Instead, he got up and left you both. He abandoned you. I paused to allow Sandy to say something. She didn't, just stared at me. Shortly after that, your mom lost the house because she couldn't afford the rent. We met, fell in love, got married, and moved into this house with my 2 sons, Mike and Richard. Since our old house was gone, I needed to help you. Anyway, I digress. I loved your mom and loved you. I loved you as if you were my own daughter, just as I loved my biological children. I never hesitated to take responsibility for raising you. I thought I had lost all that a month ago. Sandy must have heard the tremor in my voice during that last sentence. It brought her back from wherever she had been. You were Dad, you were the best father a girl could have. Many of my friends envied me, they couldn't believe it when I told them you were just my stepfather. She stopped, covering her mouth with her hand, slightly shaken by her own words. She realized within about 2 seconds what had happened to me over the past month. I continued my story. I liked the guy you chose as your life partner, and he was the proudest person in the world when you asked me to walk you down the aisle. I paused again to see where this conversation would start to sink into her head. I could clearly see when most of it finally hit her. She looked away again. Yes, Sandy, you never withdrew the invitation for me to walk you down the aisle, did you? But then your biological father came back into the picture, and poof, I'm out. He's all yours and you're in your mother's minds and conversations. I'm yesterday's hero. Did you know that she was so inattentive that she didn't even realize I never bought the suit for tomorrow as she asked me to? I watched again as Sandy tried to decide which of the issues I raised to address first. I saw the look of horror on her face when she realized she had forgotten that she had asked me, the only father she had known until last month, to walk her on her most important day. I was sure I would hear an apology for this, and that it would prompt her objections. I was wrong. Instead, she confirmed her superficiality by trying to justify it all. Yes, Dave, you met my biological father. He means more to me than my life. You have to understand that. He came back into my life just last month when he found out I was getting married, and it was so wonderful. With his flashiness and how he spoils me, buying me everything I look at twice, he's just, well, what can I say? Both of us, well, Mom too, I guess, just assumed he'd walk me down the aisle. I'm sorry I forgot that I had already asked you. It's just been like a whirlwind since he came back. Which swept you off your feet, didn't it? Yes, that's exactly what he did. Admit it, he just oozes charisma. I was recently telling Mom. She stopped when she realized what she was about to say and to whom she was about to say it. Her face was always like a shallow pond where even the lightest breeze ruffled the surface, soon replaced by a new gust of wind. Now was no exception. Emotion after emotion flickered across her face as I realized how completely she had ignored me over the last month. I watched as she processed this. I even think I saw the exact moment when she realized her mother had been just as bad. All I had heard in my own house for the previous month was, John did this or John said that. I had tried to show them how angry I was about all of it, but none of it was noticed. They were too far under John's spell. Yes, I saw his charisma too. I could understand why he was such a good salesman. What I didn't do, unlike my wife and stepdaughter, was fall under his influence. They were completely blind. When I pointed out his broken promises, 3 times, the last straw was 4 days ago when I found out I wouldn't be walking Sandy down the aisle. This revelation came only when I overheard them talking about who would be where in the church. My name wasn't even mentioned. Instead of deciding to show up and hope there was a place for me in the front pew, I started packing my things. I thought I would gently start to prepare Sandy so that future revelations wouldn't shock her. You do realize he's still a lying cheat, don't you? You know he's the same scumbag who abandoned you and your mom 20 years ago, right? He left you both back then, and as soon as he gets what he wants this time, he'll leave you again. Oh, don't be so bitter, Dad. Dave, yes, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you that my biological father would be walking me down the aisle. That's my fault, not his. You can be mad at him and call him all sorts of nasty names. What proof do you have that he's still a womanizer? I thought through my answer once more. I feared what the response to my next question would be. I knew my 20-year marriage was dead. Had I also lost my daughter? Well, in for a penny, in for a pound, as they used to say. Where is your mom? I didn't have to hold my breath for long. Sandy's eyes left mine for a long pause, then they continued to dart back and forth as she asked herself how deep my question went. Had I intentionally linked my question about why I thought her? Update, I've been moving my things out of the house for 4 days, and no one noticed a thing. Neither she nor her mother. Even when I missed the wedding rehearsal, no one asked me. And now, only now, she comes to ask me, "Are you coming to my wedding, Dad?" No, I won't be there. You invited me to walk you down the aisle, but as soon as your biological father returned, I was completely forgotten. I'm not the father anymore. Part 2, why I thought her biological father was still a cheat with where her mother was. Without a doubt, Sandy knew. The execution was left whether we end our 20-year relationship in a pile of lies or preserve the memories of mutual respect we can still hold on to. I need to tell you something. This morning, I found protection in your mom's purse. What? Without a doubt, for tonight. I had a vasectomy before I met her, so they clearly weren't for me, and I know you take birth control pills, so they weren't for you. I'm glad to say the package was unopened, so she probably hasn't slept with him yet, but buying a whole pack 24 hours before his arrival indicates intent, doesn't it? I can see by your face that this news doesn't surprise you, so I can only conclude that you're implicit in your mother betraying me and our wedding vows by falling into bed with that slippery little bastard. Do you think it's romantic that, like in a fairy tale, your mom and dad are getting back together and you can play happy families, start married life with a Porsche in the driveway instead of the Nissan I bought you? Sandy opened her mouth to respond. I raised my hand to stop her. Don't bother. Forget it, I said. The answer doesn't matter. The fact that you knew, kept quiet, and did nothing to tell me ends our relationship right here and now. I stood up, walked over to her, lifted her to her feet, and hugged her, suppressing all the emotions I hadn't yet expressed that day. I loved you. With that, I left her life. Looking back from the door, I saw utter devastation on her beautiful face as she watched me leave. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Swallowing and gasping, she desperately tried to find her phone. I assumed this was in a desperate hope that her mother hadn't turned away from her, that her mom hadn't yet physically committed adultery, that her mother could use this as a reason to convince me to forgive her. Also, that Sandy wouldn't lose her other father, the dad who had been desperately crying out for the past month that his wife had stopped loving him and who had gone completely unnoticed. Meanwhile, she had fallen again for the smooth-talking king salesman with his sweet story. I shrugged. Whether my wife had physically crossed the line or not, the protection I stumbled upon that morning was enough for me. Initially, I had planned to move out temporarily to demonstrate the extent of my dissatisfaction with the events of the past month. The morning's discovery told me I had underestimated how bad things were and pushed me to agree, after several painful hours, that moving out was necessary. I checked my conscience, it agreed with me. I jumped in the car and drove away. Epilogue, some of what follows is fact, and some are rumors. The story would not be complete without both. On the day of the rehearsal, I spent some time trying to find out which motel the newly reappeared father was staying at. My motivation? I wanted to witness my wife's infidelity firsthand, to harden my heart for what needed to be done. My efforts were in vain. Instead, I chose Plan B. After leaving Sandy, I parked on the road near my house and turned off the lights. Sure enough, less than a minute later, my former daughter drove past in tears. A herd of elephants could have followed her unnoticed. She drove straight to a specific motel and rushed directly to a specific room. I followed her closely with my trusty old SLR camera and zoom lens. Due to Sandy's cries, her mother opened the door. I was mentally prepared, at least I thought I was, for the scene that greeted me. Strangely, what bothered me wasn't the sight of Laura hastily wrapped in a motel robe with tousled hair or her ex-husband standing behind her in boxers. No, what struck me was the look of panic on her face when Sandy spoke. I had protected her from such emotions for 20 years, it's a habit. I threw the camera onto the passenger seat, turned off my phone, and drove off into the night. After Sandy was led into the room and the door closed, my knowledge of the events that followed immediately after comes from various sources. The wedding did take place the next day, but at 6 p.m. instead of the scheduled 10 a.m. first, they had to find the bride's mother. She spent the night desperately searching for me and fell asleep exhausted. Then, precious time was spent looking for the bride's biological father, but he had disappeared. As I told Sandy, once he got what he wanted, he left. I really wondered about his motivation for all of this. My research showed that he and his second wife never had children. Perhaps he wanted to experience walking his child down the aisle. Some people just like to collect life experiences. I guess he saw that Laura was still an attractive woman and wanted her, or maybe it was just an egotistical trip. Being a self-centered person, he simply turned on the charm and pursued her until she gave in. Just as I warned her he would. When things got serious, he left. It might have been the most expensive sex of his life. Even before he could get back home, several photos were sent to his wife's mailbox. She left him using their prenuptial agreement. In the end, she continued to run her father's company without him. There were rumors that, a week or so later, he was found badly beaten in some alley. It was said that his father-in-law always took care of his only daughter and never liked scum. By the time the wedding party realized he was gone, the vicar had kindly rescheduled the ceremony to 6 p.m. I will never know at what point Laura discovered that all the seams on the dress she planned to wear to the event had been torn. It would have fallen apart in her hands, just like our marriage did because of her actions. I ignored all contact from Laura and Sandy. They flooded my voicemail with pleas to come back, but that bridge was truly burned. As expected, Laura left a long message saying she had just entered John's motel room after dropping him off, and all they did was talk. The protection in her purse was intended as a novelty at the front desk. 2 photos emailed to me clearly showed this was today. Her daughter asked me to walk her down the aisle. Even that didn't affect the silly grin that almost constantly makes my face ache. Thank you for listening until the end. See you in the next video of Reddit Stories. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Goodbye. Update, I've been moving my things out of the house for 4 days, and no one noticed a thing. Neither she nor her mother. Even when I missed the wedding rehearsal, no one asked me. And now, only now, she comes to ask me, "Are you coming to my wedding, Dad?" No, I won't be there. You invited me to walk you down the aisle, but as soon as your biological father returned, I was completely forgotten. I'm not the father anymore. Part 3, Sandy stood there, frozen. The reality of my words had sunk in. Her face turned pale, and her eyes, once bright with excitement for her wedding day, now filled with confusion and regret. I could see her struggling to make sense of it all, like she was trying to rewind the clock in her mind, searching for moments she could have fixed, moments when she could have noticed what was happening to her family.
Dad, she whispered, her voice cracking, I didn't know.
I didn't realize how far this had gone. I just thought. I don't know what I thought. I stared at her for a moment, unsure whether to feel pity or anger. Sandy was my daughter in every way that counted, but she had let her biological father, that man, walk back into her life and take everything from me without so much as a second thought. You didn't know? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Sandy, your mother is with the same man who destroyed her life 20 years ago. The same man who walked out on you, on both of you, without a care in the world. And now you're giving him the honor of walking you down the aisle? After I raised you? Sandy flinched at my words. She looked down, avoiding my gaze. It's not like that, Dave. I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought maybe. I thought he had changed. He's my father. I shook my head, the frustration bubbling up inside me. People like him don't change, Sandy. He's still the same man who left when things got hard. He's still selfish. You think he's back because he loves you? No, he's here because it makes him feel good to swoop in like some kind of hero. But when it gets tough again, he'll leave, just like he always does. Sandy's lip trembled. I didn't know what to do, okay? Mom was so happy when he came back. She said it was like a second chance for our family. A second chance? I scoffed. Do you think he deserves that after all he's done? After everything I've done for this family? I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, and for a moment, I felt bad for pushing her so hard. But the anger inside me was too raw, too deep. I couldn't hold it back anymore. You chose him over me, Sandy, I said quietly. You and your mother both chose him, knowing full well what kind of man he is. And now? Now you want me to show up and pretend like nothing's wrong? To smile and be proud while he takes my place? She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I'm sorry, Dave. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I stood up from the couch and looked down at her. Sorry's not enough this time. I've spent the last month watching you and your mother drift further and further away, and I've finally accepted it. You both made your choice. Now, I'm making mine. I walked toward the door, my heart pounding. I knew this was it, the final goodbye. I couldn't be part of a family that didn't see me, that didn't respect me. I had given them everything, and in return, I had been discarded. Sandy called after me, her voice weak and desperate. Please, don't go. We can fix this. I'll talk to Mom. We'll make it right. I stopped for a second, my hand on the doorknob. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But deep down, I knew there was no fixing this. Too much had been broken. Take care of yourself, Sandy, I said without turning around. I hope you have a good life. And with that, I walked out the door, leaving behind the house, the memories, and the family I had once thought was mine. As I drove away, I felt the weight of everything I had lost. The betrayal, the broken trust, it all hurt more than I could have ever imagined. But at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had finally let go. I didn't know what the future held for me. But I knew one thing for sure, I was done living in the shadows of other people's choices. From now on, I would choose for myself.